This video is brought to you by my brand new Patreon. Stay tuned until the end or go to patreon.com/JennyGeist to find out about the benefits you can get for supporting the channel. Now without further ado, let's begin the show.
You drink to make real a dream, is it not so? Either to dream that what you seek is yours, or else to dream that what you hate is conquered. You drink to escape reality, and the irony is that even reality is a dream.
The 1935 short story Pygmalion Spectacles by Stanley G. Weinbaum is one of the first ever science fiction narratives to center around the concept of a virtual reality. It tells the tale of an unsatisfied everyman protagonist testing out a pair of goggles that emulate the five senses to create a fully immersive manufactured universe, where he then falls in love with a beautiful woman named Galatea. Not only does she represent an idealized caricature of a naive, loving woman, but she also represents an escape from the dreary hopelessness and mundanity of the world he's used to, instead promising a life of romance and rebellion. But alas, no matter how much he tried to will it so, the protagonist was not able to breathe life into this fabricated reality. His desire, passion, and will to break against societal norms all stemmed from a fictionalized view of hope and adventure that he eventually had to wake up from. After all, as much as we would like to live in a romanticized fictional world, fiction will always come to an end, whether it be the closing of a book or the turning off of a simulation. Like how alien invader stories generally represent current social anxieties about the other, or how time travel narratives generally represent a desire to grapple with our past, virtual reality narratives almost always revolve around the pitiable, universal desire for escapism, from our collective wish for an existence that is free of agony and injustice to our fears that the world that we now know is not the one we were promised by society. This duality is found throughout so many different VR narratives, especially those that have been released since the advent of the home computer made the concept feel all the more attainable. It's kind of fascinating to see happen, but unlike aliens or time travel or flying cars, this sci-fi concept was actually starting to become real. It may not be as complex as it looks in books or movies, but virtual reality headsets in one form or another have slowly become more available over the past few decades. And subsequently, the internal conflict between ignorant bliss and knowing the truth, or taking the blue pill or the red pill if you will, was certainly on a lot of people's minds. And now, in the holy year 2022, corporations and tech billionaires alike are preparing for an imminent, fully immersive metaverse. And it's bad. Oh, it's so goddamn bad. Like, what am I looking at? What is this? Is this what Stanley G. Weinbaum wanted? Is this what Snow Crash is supposed to be? Because I don't want it. I don't want any of this. Why does Mark Zuckerberg look like the second coming of bitch drips? Howdy folks, I'm Jenny Geist. So is it just me, or has every demonstration of the metaverse so far felt at least 10 times more dystopian than the sci-fi novels that supposedly inspired it? No, not just me. That's perfect, because I'm going to talk about that for 50 minutes. Oops. Over the past year or so, you have probably heard the term metaverse thrown around in one context or another, and if you haven't, what rock are you living under, and is it leasing? But even with all of this discussion and discourse about meta and crypto and Web3 dominating the Twitter sphere, there's still a lot of widespread confusion about what the metaverse actually is, and in part, that's because the term metaverse is, in its current state, essentially a colloquialism. The metaverse refers to a theorized digital world within the internet, one that is often realized through virtual or augmented reality, but not exclusively so. See, the verse in metaverse derives from the idea that this digital world would share many of the same structures as our own, with a universally applicable digital-only economy such as cryptocurrency, an ability to buy or sell limited digital-only goods such as NFTs, and even the ability to create avatars that act as one's de facto digital persona, such as these monstrosities. All of which, in a sense, transcend our real social constructs into ones that are not limited by reality, location, or appearance. In turn, the meta and metaverse. I say that it's a colloquialism, however, because it's not really an actual thing yet. Every demonstration of the technology so far has either been purely hypothetical, like Facebook's clearly staged but still dystopian feeling Meta conference, or practically redundant, like the environment-destroying, pyramid-scheming clusterfucks of the crypto and NFT scenes. This isn't to say that the metaverse as presented by Mark Zuckerberg will never be a thing, because it clearly is a technology that is being developed by several tech giants with a vested interest in its success, but as it is now, the metaverse is basically a glorified sales pitch. A proof of concept that doesn't actually show how it will work or why we should partake in it, instead showing marketable buzzwords and impractical concepts like, your friend is joining you at a concert as a hologram. Mark Zuckerberg is now an Illumination character. This ugly monkey that you buy now will actually be a valuable art piece in the future. Sure, why not? And if you're confused about why companies would even find this appealing, that is fully understandable, it's stupid and confusing and makes my brain hurt, so let me place out a hypothetical situation where it might sound attractive. Media companies in the streaming age don't like there being infinitely replaceable and piratable copies of their music, movies, TV shows, and so on. To them, this is their product, so they should get money from every single viewing of it no matter how it's being engaged with or shared. So the concept of adding farcical digital scarcity and DRM through finite non-fungible tokens is very appealing, even though to a consumer that's literally just making things less accessible and worse to use, as it inevitably leads to an economy of price hikes, scalping, and money laundering, which in turn is attractive to extremely wealthy people wanting to shift their fortunes to decentralized formats that can make them more money and won't be taxed or regulated, thus leaving the rest of us in an increasingly polluted and class-divided society, where we'll then want to turn to escapism through virtual reality video games simulating extravagant experiences, constant regurgitation of the same 5 nostalgic intellectual properties, and buying things from the VR Walmart so that we can feel something. Not to sound like a conspiracy theorist or anything, but it's all suspiciously vertically integrated and cyclical and bleak if you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Thus, without any tangible ideas to grasp onto besides redundant reinventions of existing concepts or inaccessible uses of non-existent technology, the metaverse has a bit of a branding problem as a whole. Every time it gets brought up, I see countless tweets from all over the political spectrum of people either not understanding what it is or not understanding why we should care. And I know that a lot of people like to pretend that all disagreeable sentiments about the subject are purely anecdotal and that the public at large are perfectly fine with concepts like crypto and Web3 and Meta. But based on how this past year has gone, I disagree. Yeah, crypto as a concept is becoming more well known, but that does not automatically mean it is becoming more well liked. And if you want some specific examples of people disliking the technology and why, there are far too many to read out. But for posterity, here are a few. So, as much as certain folks with influence in the tech industry might be pushing it, the metaverse is still not even close to being actually popular, or actually mainstream, or actually necessary. The things that might make it appealing to a company are not appealing to a consumer, and the things that make it appealing to a company are not even fully developed yet themselves, leading to this corporate wishy-washy back and forth that we've been dealing with for the past few years by now. If you want a deeper dive into the exact science and utility and sociology of crypto and NFT specifically, I highly recommend checking out Dan Olson's extremely informative video on the subject. I was already researching for this project before his video released, and it still taught me so much about how truly ghoulish this scene can be. So now, with all of this in mind, put yourself in the shoes of a marketing team or journalist that is trying to explain to people why they should care about this purely theoretical and kinda silly framework that won't really improve their lives in any material way, but will surely make the companies involved a ton of money. It's a hard sell on its own, so the go-to of most outlets would be to compare it to fiction. For another modern example, the current state of interstellar travel has heavily utilized the imagery of spatial colonization that has been popularized by works like Star Trek. While obviously the Space Force or SpaceX or Blue Origin's plans to eventually colonize space are not going to involve cool swashbuckling adventures with a bisexual Starfleet captain, the core idea of going boldly where no man has gone before still has power that might cause people to take interest. The problem with doing that for the metaverse is that most virtual reality stories are cautionary in nature. Unlike Star Trek, which presents a fairly utopian society where science and exploration are accessible and commonplace, I don't think many people are begging to enter the worlds of Pygmalion Spectacles, or The Matrix, or even Ready Player One, all of which paint their worlds as varying levels of dystopian. The cyberpunk landscapes of Snow Crash are not sexy. The barren trailer stacks in Ready Player One are not sexy. Zion in The Matrix Reloaded is not sexy. Well, maybe that one is. And most importantly, the escapism aspect that prevails in each of these works is almost never presented as a good thing that we should aspire for in reality. But we gotta choose one of them, so we might as well choose the one that has a bunch of flashy nostalgic intellectual properties.
If you saw the 2018 movie Ready Player One, you may remember the Oasis, a glitzy, fast-paced metaverse with gleaming cities, beautiful people, and excitement of many varieties. In short, the perfect escape from the drudgery of real life. We may be on track to our own version of the Oasis after an announcement yesterday from Epic Games that it has raised $1 billion to put towards building the metaverse.
If you're a big fan of the movie Ready Player One, you're in for a treat, as we are slowly coming to an era where immersive technology will play a huge part in our day-to-day lives, and it's all thanks to the metaverse.
First ever Ready Player One inspired metaverse multiplayer online role-playing game garners 4K members even before launch.
Multiple metaverses, one avatar. Ready Player Me raises $13 million to make it happen.
Mark Zuckerberg outlines his vision for a Ready Player One-like metaverse, and it sounds wild.
The metaverse concept is rooted in science fiction novels like Snow Crash and Ready Player One.
What you see in Ready Player One is going to start to materialize as something that is very real. I think we're rapidly progressing towards that as a legitimate mass market experience. Activision Blizzard CEO, Bobby Kotick.
At a glance, it is extremely weird that Ready Player One, a YA novel about a dystopian society relying on escapism in a fake world after ruining their own, is being used as a shining example of what the metaverse could be, both by media outlets and actual startups. It seems like another one of those situations where a big company completely lacks self-awareness about their own work, like Disney releasing NFTs of WALL-E, or Ubisoft producing a TV show about the problems with the games industry. And yeah, it certainly is tone-deaf and weird, especially after all of the real-world bullshit that I just talked about. But I also don't think the comparison is entirely off base, just not for the reasons that companies think it is. In fact, I think we could probably learn something insightful by re-examining one of the supposed inspirations of this weird new technology, especially when contrasting it with the other famous VR narratives that came before it. Although this would mean actually reading Ready Player One and then doing a deep dive about its world building, so actually never mind, I'm just gonna make this another licensed game video. Howdy folks, I'm Jenny Geist. Today I'm reviewing the 2018 PS4 game Hotel Transylvania Monsters Overboard, as well as... Shit. Fine, I'll read it. Hi, post-editing Jenny here with the heads up. WB really doesn't want me to upload this video because of its Ready Player One footage, even though it's under fair use, and I also include footage of another one of their movies with no issues, but anyway, all movie footage here is either going to have a watermark or a filter. I apologize for the inconvenience. Ready Player One is a 2011 science fiction novel by Ernest Cline that takes place in the year 2045, where a continually overpopulated and malnourished society has taken refuge through the adoption of an extremely advanced virtual reality known as the Oasis. Using a special visor that scans images of the world directly into your retina and gloves that give real-time haptic feedback of the digital environments, the Oasis has given the world a hyper-immersive escape from the cruel world of tomorrow, one that is not especially framed as a great thing. The population at large has essentially given up on improving society, feeding the hungry, or helping the impoverished, instead being content with living in stacked together trailer slums where people can sit inside and waste away in a fake, distant, easier world. However, Ready Player One is also a novel about how a virtual reality would be the coolest thing ever. An encyclopedic knowledge of 80s movies, TV shows, video games, music, and general pop culture is one of the most valuable skills that one can have, so much so that memorizing the script to Monty Python's Holy Grail is a required asset to obtaining sovereign control over an essential part of everyday life. It is a novel where the anonymity of a virtual reality is treated as an unequivocal good, making lives easier for minority groups, lower classes, disabled people, and so on. The central conflict is to prevent a massive, omnipresent, evil corporation known as IOI from taking control of said reality, because the Oasis becoming a, and I quote, fascist state would ruin millions of lives. All of this is to say that Ready Player One is a very confused property, which is why its adoption as the comparison point of the metaverse seemingly doesn't make much sense. Like I said earlier, if you look at it through the angle of Ready Player One being a dystopian story, then citing it as an inspiration for the metaverse is completely missing the point of the novel. Like, why would you choose to replicate the mistake of ignoring real problems in favor of rampant consumerism? A company as huge and ubiquitous as Facebook using their fortune not to improve the infrastructure or quality of the material world, but to fund a system that will only exacerbate its strain, is not exactly a turn-on. That's why the comparison only works when looking at it through the latter angle, focusing on the improvements it can bring to society, like connecting people from afar, helping race relations, or allowing for escapism. All things that sound nice on paper, but aren't exactly supported by the narrative. Except in this case, it's not because the text is nuanced or anything, it's because Ernest Cline is kind of a hack. And because this is YouTube, yes, I'm about to discuss spoilers for the novel and its film adaptation, although if there's someone out there who does care about Ready Player One spoilers in the year 2022, I would probably take a really long shower after meeting them. The main plot of Ready Player One revolves around the death of Oasis creator James Halliday, who, after his passing, set up a Willy Wonka-esque competition to find his successor as sole sovereign controller of the Oasis. This leads to millions of people studying Halliday's life and his many interests to find clues, in turn leading to a resurgence in the popularity and regurgitation of 80s pop culture, which our protagonist Wade Watts is deeply absorbed into. Skills like knowing how to play Joust or memorizing the scripts to war games aren't just nerdy pastimes, they are literally essential, so much so that the aforementioned evil corporation IOI has entire teams of Poindexters studying these pop culture works for clues in the hunt, so they can then feed arcade tips and film dialogue to specialized hunting avatars called Sixers. Essentially, the corporation is co-opting nerd culture in hopes of hijacking the Oasis for their corporate plans, which actual nerds and Oasis users like Wade are having none of. In the end, the hunt is won by a group of diverse, honest, well-meaning nerds who want to keep the Oasis the way it is now and actually improve the world somewhat on the side. Which, yeah, might sound attractive as a YA teen dystopia setup or even as a real-life video game plot, but because of the way Ernest Cline built this world, Wade and his friends are not really improving anything through their rebellion. Seriously, if you dive into the nitty-gritty of the world building, the Oasis on its own is no less capitalistic or classist than the real world that's currently in crisis, IOI or not. For instance, traveling to different areas in the Oasis costs real-world money, whether it be ships needing fuel to get around or teleporters requiring passes for fast travel. This is basically essential to experience anything in the Oasis, and it already costs money, all for a resource that is effectively infinite. It's not like there's digital fossil fuels that are finite enough that the digital Highwind needs to wait in line at a digital Costco to get digital gas that's cheaper than the other digital gas stations in digital LA. But since the default Oasis goggles and gloves cost only a quarter, Gregarious Games receives the profit they need to power the Oasis from the transportation costs, commerce, and rent. Yes, despite the Oasis including entire solar systems of planets, despite construction fees being a thing of the past and buildings having easy templates for creation, companies still need to pay rent for their digital storefronts and people still need to pay rent for their digital bases. Likewise, despite anyone being able to make digital items through coding and creation, clothing, vehicles, weapons, and other essential items to get by in this metaverse all cost real money to purchase. Theoretically, I could just copy and paste a picture of Gur from Invader Zim and put it on a shirt and make infinite copies for everyone in the world to wear, but in this universe, it would have to be a finite purchasable good for basically no reason besides profit. Sounds familiar! Furthermore, towards the beginning of the book, Wade is so poor that he cannot afford to leave the Oasis planet where his digital school is located. He's stuck at level 3 and can't possibly compete in the hunt because he quite simply doesn't have the financial resources to do so. When he does miraculously complete a challenge that just so happens to be located near his school, he gains enough riches to afford travel, a home base, a better setup, and even a full body haptic suit. All exorbitantly expensive tools that give him much more of an advantage in the Oasis. And even with all of those advantages, IOI is still powerful and rich enough of a corporation to make the experience oppressive, as they can just put indestructible shields around challenges required to win the hunt, or they can attempt to kill Wade in real life and face no consequences until he comes into power. And the group only wins the contest after the billionaire friend of Halliday, Ogden Morrow, swoops in with some private jets to bring the group to his mansion, where they can use his expensive Oasis setups to kick ass and save the day. Money is everything in this universe. It's the whole driving force of the story, and despite all of the calls to improve the world, it's never once called into question why a fictional escapist reality needs to be so reliant on money in the first place. Listen. We live in a society, a capitalist one. I know that makes me sound like the most rote video essayist of all time, but it's true, and Ernest Cline is a-okay with that. Yeah, the system can be improved. IOI is treated as an unequivocally horrible corporation that shouldn't be a thing, but Halliday's corporation, Gregarious Games, is still there to be their noble counterpart. After all, IOI founder Nolan Sorrento is just a poser who wants money. Meanwhile, James Halliday is practically deified as a holy example of what nerd culture should be. IOI literally holds indentured servants that are pretty much work-to-death slaves, acting as Sixers or tech support or the like, while the good guys wouldn't dream of exploiting their workers. They just created and host a system that allows IOI onto it to exploit their workers. But hey, it's not the Oasis's fault that it has a free market. Basically, Ernest Cline's work treats capitalism as an inescapable fact of life, which in turn means rampant exploitation and the subsequent desire for escapism are also going to be inescapable facts of life. The system isn't perfect, but it brought us war games and Monty Python's Holy Grail and Star Wars and the Oasis, so it can't just not be a thing. Sure, it's important to step outside of fiction every once in a while to help take down IOI or give your girlfriend a kissy, but the Oasis itself is still a necessity that needs to be protected. IOI monetizing the Oasis is outright labeled as fascism multiple times, and we know that they are willing to kill or use slaves to reach this end goal. But it's not as if the Oasis isn't monetized already. IOI wants to add a subscription fee, but is travel cost to get literally anywhere to do literally anything not a subscription fee with extra steps? Really, the only tangible change to the system that we actually see is them wanting to run ads on the UI, which sucks, but is not exactly a high-stakes conflict. In fact, it's not even that different from our present-day reality.
Behold, the internet!
My God, it's full of ads.
Again, they already have slaves. They are already actively hurting the game experience because the Oasis can't just ban people who exploit its platform for unethical purposes, for whatever reason. This matters because it is directly at odds with the real-world dystopia that the novel itself sets up. The world is overpopulated, people are going hungry, getting addicted to drugs, living in stacks of trailers that regularly collapse, and the Oasis is set up as a great escape from all of that misery, allowing the current generation to live the regular life that is no longer available to them. But it also establishes that James Halliday, Ogden Morrow, and Gregarious Games as a whole are exorbitantly rich, which calls into question why their goal was to create escapism rather than solve any of these problems. I know what people who read the book are going to say, and yes, the character of Artemis does call out this question directly in the text. Her motivation to win the contest and gain Halliday's fortune is to use the money to help improve the world. But when she says this, Wade immediately necks her for it. If I win that dough, I'm going to make sure everyone on this planet has enough to eat. Once we tackle world hunger, then we can figure out how to fix the environment and solve the energy crisis.
Right. And after you pull off that miracle, you can genetically engineer a bunch of Smurfs and unicorns to frolic around this new perfect world you've created.
Oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, I hate him. I hate him so much. Ernest Cline, I'm adding you to my enemy list. I know, he's supposed to grow from this. One of the final lines of the novel is him outright refuting his earlier statement, but it doesn't amount to much because, like I said earlier, Klein just can't imagine a world not based on consumption. Like, in the film version, they start turning off the Oasis 2 days a week so that people can go outside and touch grass, I guess. And yeah, the fact that people can get so lost into this digital world instead of helping the communities around them sucks, but turning it off sometimes is just a band-aid solution. Turning off the Oasis 2 days a week won't stop world hunger, or the drug crisis, or the fact that a corporation is essentially allowed to have slaves. But I guess they just can't think of any more imaginative ways to restructure themselves beyond one of those talk to each other signs at a coffee shop. So yeah, the world of Ready Player One is not exactly aspirational. The fictional metaverse takes away from the real-world dystopia, and the real-world dystopia is secondary to the fictional metaverse, leading to a confused narrative that is as ideologically bleak as the real-life metaverse that Facebook is trying to create. So in a way, it's not weird that Ready Player One is being used as an example of what the metaverse could be, because the kind of people that would be into a book like Ready Player One are the same ones that would view this as an ideal future. You know what is weird though? Beyond the metaverse nonsense dredging up some new discussion of it, Ready Player One as an IP has not stayed in the public consciousness at all. The novel was a New York Times bestseller when it released in 2011, but that was pretty much the extent of its initial popularity. The film version was mostly the butt of a joke when it came out, making a somewhat underwhelming by blockbuster standards $580 million on an $175 million budget, which, when you account for the marketing budget doubling or tripling that number, means the profits were likely fairly minimal. Not only does this stand in stark contrast with its usage as a vision of the VR future, but it also contrasts with another extremely famous Warner Brothers series about a dystopian VR universe, one that spawned a trilogy, several spin-off works, and a recently released fourth installment, and one that, at a glance, has no business being mentioned in the same breath as Ready Player One. But if we're going to discuss the differing narratives of the metaverse, it is pretty much impossible not to mention The Matrix. The Matrix is a 1999 science fiction film directed by Lana and Lily Wachowski, depicting a post-apocalyptic world where reality as we know it today is merely a simulation, one that was created by an army of oppressive machines who seek to use the subjugated human race as their main power source. Within this Matrix, a computer programmer named Thomas Anderson, or Neo as he prefers to be called, slowly begins to suspect that the world around him is not what it seems, eventually leading him down a rabbit hole of discovery that changes everything. Not only is reality as he knows it crafted in a way to serve an oppressive class, but Neo himself might be the key to saving humanity from eternal subjugation. And to find that enlightenment and escape this virtual reality, all he needs to do is make a choice. Take the blue pill and wake up believing whatever he chooses to believe, or take the red pill and see how deep this rabbit hole goes. All of this is to say that Ready Player One and The Matrix have about as much in common as Muhammad Ali and Anti-Lock Brakes. They're both works of dystopian fiction explored through the lens of virtual reality, but the execution and messages conveyed by each are pretty much polar opposites. The Oasis is a fun video game that people voluntarily play, whereas The Matrix is a system that people are non-consensually born into. The Oasis is a secondary world on top of the real one that we live in, whereas The Matrix posits that the real world we live in is a fake simulation altogether. The Oasis represents wish fulfillment, and The Matrix represents blissful ignorance, so of course that one NFT startup that keeps bugging you in your DMs is going to reference the cool, fun former and not the dystopian, dreary latter. Done and done. Let's move on to our next most iconic VR narrative, Sword Art Online. No. Even if these works are so blatantly different that any contrasting between the two would fit right at home on r/movie details, the authorial intent and messaging behind them are honestly super relevant to this discussion. If Ready Player One is supposed to paint an optimistic, hopeful version of the future that companies would want to emulate, then The Matrix paints the cynical, apocalyptic extreme of that same idea, one that is entirely based on the lived struggles of two marginalized creators. Series creators Lana and Lily Wachowski are both transgender transgender women, and it's become somewhat common knowledge by now that the Matrix series as a whole is a transgender allegory, and in retrospect, it is not subtle. When living in the Matrix, Neo is depressed and unfulfilled, and living with an identity that was assigned to him by a higher power that pushes for conformity rather than true personal freedom. He only finds true personal freedom when he takes a pill showing that the reality he thought he knew was merely a prison enacted by a faceless, omnipresent, inescapable ideology. I mean, seriously, the Matrix is literally built out of binary, as in the gender binary. Come on, people. All it's missing is for Neo to be a Celeste speedrunner, or a David Lynch fan, or a video essayist. Anyway, these themes aren't only there to resonate with trans audiences, however, as the entire series was massively successful long before the Wachowskis came out and the LGBT read became so popular. Basically, the Matrix is a distillation of our modern-day capitalist and colonialist system. At a glance, it's normal, it's comfortable, and it's necessary, because the world outside of it is an apocalyptic hellscape that no human should have to suffer through. But when looking deeper, the Matrix still only stands to benefit a privileged class. You are allowed an illusion of freedom, that archetypical American dream mindset where you can do anything if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, but at the end of the day, you need to work for a company that doesn't care about you, to afford rent for a landlord that doesn't care about you, to survive in a world that doesn't care about you. Everything you do funnels back to the same oppressors, whether it be the uncaring tech company that Neo wanted to escape working for at the beginning of the film, or the machines from the future that keep humans in prison pods. Furthermore, not only does our villain, Agent Smith, dead-name Neo with his Matrix-assigned name and threaten what may happen if he attempts to transition out of the Matrix, but he is also portrayed as an agent of the law who can, at any time, violate one's personal anatomy for his own gain. His entire role plays off of the idea that we must stand aside or even sacrifice our bodies so the government can stop attempts to upheave the system, because any questioning of it, no matter how small, would undermine the reason that it exists in the first place. Like how Artemis challenged the status quo of Ready Player One in a way that ultimately went unexplored by both the characters and the author himself, the character of Cypher from the first Matrix film also exists to challenge his own series status quo in a much more narratively satisfying way, in that, unlike Neo, he regrets taking the red pill. He doesn't exactly care for living in a sewer and only eating slop and risking his life for an impossible-seeming goal. So, when he makes a deal with Agent Smith to return to his role in the Matrix, forgetting everything for a life of blissful ignorance and escapism, you can understand why he does it, but his actions are still treated as unequivocally selfish. His comfortable life in the Matrix was built upon the exploitation of not just himself, but millions and millions of others, many of whom are in a much worse position and can't simply opt back into the system. Morpheus and Trinity are fugitives because of their beliefs, so they can't just make a deal with Smith and return to their lives. Neo is the one, an anomaly that could theoretically take down the Matrix, so they're going to dispose of him no matter what. Tank and Dozer were never plugged in at all, so they couldn't enter the Matrix if they wanted to. The apocalyptic hellscape of reality is all they know, and if they don't at least try to fight the machines, it's all they'll ever know. So when Neo is initially presented with a choice between the blue pill or the red pill, one allowing him to stay in a reality where nothing changes but nothing improves, and one allowing him to escape to a harsher but more free system, the answer is a no-brainer. The red pill allows for liberation from gender roles, from conformity, from capitalism. That is the ideal end goal, and that message is practically the ideological opposite of what is spouted by Ready Player One. The Wachowskis imagine capitalism as a flawed system that should be escaped and dismantled, while Ernest Cline imagines capitalism as a flawed system that could be improved, but the thought of it not being a thing at all is blasphemous, and nowhere is this divide more clear than how the two works handle, again, gender. The Wachowskis view the gender binary as a fundamental and controlling part of the oppressive regime, whereas Cline's work revels in traditional gender roles. The ever-so-important Halliday was terrified of women and lusted over his best friend's wife until her death, even immortalizing her into the Oasis as a ghoulish ghost of this once very real woman who had very real wants and desires. The character of H is a black gay woman who pretends to be a straight man to fit in with the status quo, mentioning, and I quote, that the Oasis was the best thing that had ever happened to both women and people of color, as they are able to just pretend to be white men to get by. Yeah, systemic bigotry is still bad enough in 2045 that one would still need to hide their race, gender, and sexual orientation in a fictional metaverse. And it's presented as this woke win for minorities movies. Unlike The Matrix, having to present as an identity that isn't your own is treated as a feature, not a bug, which really says it all. Listen, I'm not going to pretend that The Matrix is 100% pure either, considering it does fall into the trap of anti-capitalist capitalist media that I touched upon in my Mythic Quest video. Without delving into too many spoilers, the recent Matrix Resurrections is pretty blatantly against the concept of franchises, which is really cool from a storytelling perspective, but from a real-life perspective, well, being a big-budget Warner Brothers IP, it can't escape stuff like cross-promotion with Harry Potter, exploitation of special effects houses to get the movie done on a tight schedule, and the most ironic of them all, Matrix NFTs. At least Keanu thinks they're dumb. That's a Reddit gold moment if I ever did see one.
And so like when you think about the concept of digital scarcity and things that are, they can't be copied.
That are easily reproduced.
Well, but they're not the same, right? It's not a fake version of you.
I wonder do we get a cut of that?
So yeah, at the end of the day, even something like The Matrix is still going to be a pawn of some billionaire tyrant's corporate game. But here's the distinction, at least for me. Escapism into a fake world is not inherently bad. I mean, that's what movies are. The Matrix is a movie, and I don't think the Wachowskis as film and television creators are fundamentally against film or television as a concept. Likewise, video games as a medium are built around escaping into a digital world, and I don't think anyone watching this will argue that video games aren't art or that they're just being made to distract the masses from Jeffrey Giraffe's evil bidding. So if you look at escapism through that lens, then well, the same attitude can also apply to the hundreds of online communities found in live service games or MMOs like Fortnite and World of Warcraft. Online worlds that have their own currencies, trade systems, economies, events relating to gameplay and leisure alike, almost like some sort of metaverse. So if I'm going to investigate the types of narratives that surround the metaverse, I would be remiss not to discuss these existing communities and where they fall on the ideological spectrum. With that said, have you all heard of the critically acclaimed video game Final Fantasy XIV? Before we begin this section, I should be fully transparent. I am only doing this part so that I can write off an FF14 subscription as a business expense. I hope you understand. Final Fantasy XIV Online is a massively multiplayer online installment in the long-running Final Fantasy series, and even though it was technically launched in 2010 or 2013 for the relaunch, it has grown to be one of the most popular MMOs of all time within the past few years. Not to sound cliche, but I'm not usually an MMO person. However, the critical praise, positive word of mouth, and extensive free trial eventually convinced me to check it out. Even though I've only had enough time to clear through the first campaign, I've really enjoyed my time with it and do hope to chip away at the rest of the content over the next few years. The combat is collaborative and engaging, the world has a massive and wondrous scope, and the story, while initially slow, starts going to some really interesting places by the end of the first campaign. I'm especially looking forward to finishing Heavensward and venturing past the free trial to explore more of the game's subscription-only features, such as buying digital items using real-world money in the online shop, aggressively trying to place a bid on one of the finite digital housing plots of which I would then need to pay a mortgage on, playing more and more to get richer and richer to have cooler outfits to display as a status symbol so people know that my cat girl is cute and that I'm spending all my time in an escapist reality. Yeah, despite being part of a fully digital world, Final Fantasy XIV does bring in a few of the darker parts of society that the aforementioned VR narratives embraced and rejected respectively. And I'm not just talking about the obvious logistical fact that there is a monthly subscription fee required to access this world at all. Like that housing example I just touched on, people wait days upon days for finite digital plots of land to open just to give their warriors of light a place to hang out and access certain exclusive features. And when you actually do get one, you have to pay it off with in-game money and access it at least once every 45 days or else it disappears. So if you want to take a break from the game for a few months and nobody else is there to check on it, bye-bye housey and bye-bye workshops, gardens, vendors, and so on. To an outsider, it may sound kinda scuzzy, maybe even a little similar to the paying rent for a digital location thing that I criticized in Ready Player One. While I'm not going to say that it isn't scuzzy, I do think that when playing an MMO, there is a certain understanding from the player base that, yeah, technically this game does only exist to extract money from your wallet every single month for the rest of time. Obviously, most games are made to make a profit, but MMOs in particular basically need you to stick with them consistently to cover the extraordinary cost of developing content for one project and hosting 24/7 servers 365 days a year, and to actually give the company a profit on top of that. I think that even the most hardcore MMO fans wouldn't deny that the distinction between a good MMO and a cheap money-grabbing scheme is the actual content and nothing more. Like, personally, I find Fortnite to look pretty hollow and cynical with all of its monetization and cross-promotion, but part of that is likely colored by the fact that Fortnite just isn't my kind of game in the first place. It's easier to overlook things like that when you're actually engaged by the gameplay or story, and with that logic, I would argue that the core content is what sets MMOs as a concept apart from, well, the metaverse. Not only in the factor that one is meant for entertainment and one is meant for commerce, but also in the fact that the metaverse solely markets itself on escapism as a means to distract, to consume, or to buy products, while MMOs use escapism as a tool to empower on top of to profit from. Empowerment, that really is a nice word to describe the good that can come from escapism. We can't always fight against the scary or powerful elements in our real lives, whether they be personal demons or societal corruption, but fiction gives people the ability to face those fears or anxieties in a controlled environment, with video games and MMOs in particular giving you, the player, agency over your situation. I can't just call up my friends and go march on Jeffrey Bezos' mansion to demand that he starts paying his employees better, but I can call up my friends to go do a dungeon raid, where I'm a cool heroic cat girl who can keep them safe and healed, while my friends are cool fantasy creatures that I can band together with to save the world. Then when we're done, we can head back to our digital houses and chill, shoot the shit, customize our homes, and do what we do in real life, but with less stakes and more control. It's not just being sold a house in a game that I would have to stay subscribed to indefinitely to keep, it's an outlet to imagine, to interpret our real-world circumstances and desires in a safe, artistically inspired way. Likewise, seeing The Matrix in theaters isn't just giving a big corporation money to see best husbando Keanu Reeves do cool fights on the big screen, it's an outlet to confront our fears about society in a concise 2-hour experience with thrills and romance and a clean, satisfying ending. It's fun and exciting and empowering. Meta, on the other hand, is not empowering. NFTs as a concept are not empowering. Capitalism, for those of us that do not benefit from it, is not empowering. That's because, unlike the media conglomerates of Square Enix, Warner Brothers, Disney, or any of those featured in Ready Player One, tech companies like Facebook have not cultivated a brand image that hones in on your sense of empowerment or storytelling or nostalgia, so the attempts to sell a form of escape generally fall flat. When you remove that layer of excitement and wistfulness, all you see is one of the richest companies in the world trying to convince you to escape from the problems that it helps start. Let's not forget that Facebook allowed enough data collection from 2010 to 2014 that Cambridge Analytica was able to compile the profiles of 87 million Facebook users and sell them to the presidential campaigns of Ted Cruz and Donald Trump, then allowing hate speech and misinformation to spread at an unheard of scale that is estimated to have had a massive effect on the results of the 2016 election, an event that spiraled into many more issues that a lot of people might want to find escapism from. But we don't want to get that escapism from the company that helped cause these problems to record profit, especially without the assurance that this new system will be any safer than their very flawed existing one that still very much exists. Unfortunately, this is a problem that is not even exclusive to the metaverse concept in our modern day tech environment. We are about to enter the third year of a global pandemic that still has no signs of slowing down, and we are now in the era where the effects of climate change are starting to become widely felt. Many people are looking for an escape from this harsh reality, including folks like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, both of whom are currently partaking in a billionaire space race because they project that the Earth itself is too far gone and that we as a species need to escape to a colony on Mars, despite the fact that these space launches are only increasing the carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere each year, and that personalities as obscenely wealthy and powerful as both of these men do actually have the influence to maybe actually commit to green energy and environmental reform. Oh, my vocal cords, jeez. The world is not too far gone. Even now, I would not advise anyone anyone to fall into the doomed trap of thinking our species is already dead. But improvement does take investment and care that will not directly benefit the 1% that are already in power, while creating entirely new societies in cyberspace or actual space will. That's where Mark Zuckerberg would be the deified Halliday-esque creator of the metaverse, escaping from his tarnished reputation as the creator of a reviled and systematically harmful website. That's where Elon Musk would be the de facto leader of a corporatized cyberpunk Mars colony, escaping the consequences of his family's apartheid profiteering. These outlandish sci-fi roles give them control, legacy, and empowerment. It's billionaire escapism, and it's being marketed to us as regular escapism. And that sucks. that it's bad. It's a bad thing. Sorry.
He saw finally the implication of the name Galatea. Galatea, Pygmalion statue, given life by Venus in the ancient Grecian myth. But his Galatea, warm and lovely and vital, must remain forever without the gift of life, since he was neither Pygmalion nor god.
So, remember the pulp sci-fi story that I mentioned in the intro as one of the first ever narratives to center around a virtual reality? Well, there's technically one part of it that I did not mention, specifically the inclusion of an epilogue that reveals how exactly that virtual reality came to be. After waking up from the virtual reality experience, the protagonist discovers that it wasn't just some drunken hallucination or futuristic vision, but a stereoscopic film shot in first person and projected into the titular spectacles to create an elaborate illusion of reality, which means that the woman he fell in love with, Galatea, was actually a real actress who wasn't entirely out of his real-world grasp. Essentially, the author concludes with the idea that yes, humans cannot breathe life into a virtual reality, but behind every constructed world, there are still circumstances of our own reality making it so. Real life is not like the Matrix, where the alternate world was created by cold, uncaring machines. All of these escapist narratives that we talked about, both real and fictional, came from creators with their own lived experiences and ideologies that shaped their works. And on that note, I think it would be incredibly unfair to pigeonhole works like Ready Player One or the real-life Oculus Quest 2 as the sole harbingers of the end times, because they are all inevitable products of the culture we live in. Fiction absolutely can shape the world around us. I've done entire videos talking about the subject, but I also think that correlation between popular fictitious attitudes and already popular real-world sentiments is going to happen no matter what. In an era where escapism is a popular concept, it is inevitable that artists both big and small are going to hop onto that trend, even if that means Warner Brothers developing a multi-million-dollar franchise about how cool the regurgitation of pop culture IP is, or Mark Zuckerberg trying to create a world where Facebook isn't universally despised. In a macro sense, this phenomenon isn't anything particularly new or worth writing home about, or in my case, writing a 50-minute long video essay about. However, one major thing did stick out to me when analyzing these works, and it's ultimately why I decided to make this video in the first place. Because on a broad cultural level, the most pervasive stories in this science fiction subgenre have seemingly shifted from a tone of let's band together and change the system to let's simply escape the system, with the latter being outright touted by the same quote-unquote system that these stories tend to fight against. To me, that's where this phenomenon crosses the barrier from typical corporate co-opting of a popular trend to maybe this is a somewhat harmful and reductive ideology to live by. Oppressive corporations weaponizing fiction as a concept to make money is nothing new, but corporations weaponizing escapism to market it as an entire lifestyle is, and that's not great. Once again, I'm never going to say that escapism is inherently bad or that using fiction to process the world around you is being a capitalist sheep, because both are positively stupid notions. Like, I love playing video games where I can escape into a grand world and take control of my destiny, and I love watching movies about cool heroes who fight the system and form a found family. But at the end of the day, escapism should be used as a tool to find solace and not an end goal to base your life around. Any ideology that presents it as a latter is not one that has your best interests at heart, because said lifestyle would be based almost entirely around consumption. And companies really like it when people base their entire lifestyles around consumption. It makes them a lot of money, gives them a lot of power, and enables them to do whatever they want, societal or environmental impacts be damned. And if that's not enough to dissuade you, then at least consider that it's really fucking ugly, and if this is the future, then I hope the next thing they invent is time travel so I can get the fuck out of here. Wait. Fuck! Howdy folks, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out my brand new Patreon. For as low as $3 to $5 a month, you can get an amazing set of perks including early access to new videos, your name listed in the credits, monthly behind the scenes blog posts, and an exclusive Discord server. The more support I get, the more time I can dedicate to the channel to make in-depth video essays like these, so be sure to click the link in the description below or go to patreon.com/JennyGeist. Even if you can't donate though, liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing are all still immensely helpful to me, and it means the world. Like, seriously, thank you all so much for the support and encouragement over the past few months. It has been amazing. I understand this was one of my heavier videos, which is part of why it took a little bit longer than usual to finish, but on the upside, I will be able to pump out a lot more videos soon. This is just the start of a brand new season of content with higher production values, more focused and in-depth topics, and hopefully a more consistent release schedule, all thanks to your support. With that said, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all later.